The sun hung low over Sam Whitaker's sprawling 10-acre property, casting a golden glow over the fields and the small, crystal-clear pond nestled near the tree line. It was his slice of heaven, a place where he could enjoy the quiet away from the chaos of city life. He had worked hard to buy this land, ensuring that he had space, privacy, and the freedom to live without interference. Unlike the HOA-controlled neighborhood down the road, where regulations dictated everything from mailbox color to grass height, Sam's land was his own kingdom. That peace, however, was shattered one morning when he stepped outside with his coffee and noticed something off about his pond. The usual shimmering reflection was gone, replaced by dark, murky patches. Frowning, he set his cup down and walked over, his boots crunching against the gravel path. The closer he got, the worse the sight became. Floating in the water were heaps of black garbage bags, plastic containers, and what looked like old furniture. His peaceful pond had been turned into a dump overnight. Sam's stomach twisted in anger. Who would do this? He had no neighbors close enough to accidentally mistake his property for a landfill. His land was fenced off, and there were clear, private property, no trespassing signs posted at every entrance. As he scanned the area, something caught his eye, a piece of paper fluttering against a half-sunken bag. He fished it out with a stick and flipped it over. His jaw clenched. It was a printed flyer for the local HOA's spring cleaning initiative. He'd heard about it. Residents in the HOA community were being encouraged to clean up their clutter and dispose of old junk. Clearly, someone had taken that as an excuse to dump their mess on his land, and he had a very strong suspicion who was behind it. Corinne Mitchell, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, a woman notorious for her entitlement and arrogance. She had tried more than once to pressure Sam into voluntarily joining the HOA, insisting that his property was an eyesore compared to their perfectly manicured streets. Sam had refused every time, knowing full well what a nightmare it would be. Corinne had never taken rejection well, and now it seemed she had found a new way to get under his skin. Sam's grip on the flyer tightened. Oh, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sam's blood boiled as he stared at the mess in his pond. He knew Corinne had always been pushy, but this, dumping trash on his land, that was a new low. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think rationally. Storming over to her house and yelling wouldn't fix anything. He needed proof. Pulling out his phone, he snapped photos of the trash, making sure to capture the HOA flyer among the debris. He waded into the shallow end of the pond, fishing out a few bags to inspect their contents. Inside, he found discarded paperwork, old envelopes, and even a broken lamp. A quick glance at one of the envelopes made his lips curl into a smirk. Corinne Mitchell, 482 Oak Ridge Drive. Well, 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 Sam muttered, shaking his head. Looks like someone forgot to cover their tracks. With the evidence in hand, Sam hopped into his truck and drove toward the HOA neighborhood. He wasn't planning on knocking on Corinne's door just yet. He had a better idea. Instead, he stopped by the HOA office, a small brick building near the community entrance. He pushed open the door, and the receptionist, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked up. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yeah," Sam said, setting the HOA flyer and Corinne's trash-ridden envelope on the counter. "I think you have a resident who misunderstood the concept of spring cleaning." The woman frowned, picking up the papers and examining them. Her face paled slightly when she saw Corinne's name. "Where did you find these?" "In my pond," Sam said flatly, along with about a dozen trash bags full of her junk. The receptionist's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not allowed." "No kidding," Sam said, folding his arms. "So what's the HOA going to do about it?" The woman hesitated. Sam knew how these HOAs worked. They protected their own, especially someone as influential as Corinne. He could already see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to sweep this under the rug. "Sir, I'll need to speak with our board members before taking any action," she said carefully. "I'm sure this was just a misunderstanding." Sam let out a dry laugh. "Oh, there's no misunderstanding. Corinne knew exactly what she was doing." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And if the HOA doesn't handle this, I'll take legal action. I have photos, video, and physical evidence tying her to the mess. Either you deal with her or I'll see you all in court." The receptionist swallowed hard. I'll notify the board immediately. Sam gave a curt nod and turned to leave. He wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. If Karen thought she could get away with dumping her trash on his property, she had another thing coming. By the time Sam got home, his frustration hadn't faded one bit. He parked his truck near the pond and took another long look at the mess. The sheer nerve of Karen was unbelievable. Not only had she dumped her junk here, but she had also assumed there would be no consequences. That was about to change. The next morning, Sam decided to pay Karen a visit. He drove down to her pristine neighborhood, where every house looked identical, and every lawn was perfectly trimmed to HOA-approved standards. Karen's house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a large two-story home with a ridiculous amount of garden gnomes standing in military formation on the front lawn. He knocked on the door, and within seconds it swung open. Karen stood there, dressed in a pastel cardigan, her signature pearl necklace resting on her collarbone. Her expression soured the moment she saw him. "What do you want?" she asked, crossing her arms. Sam held up his phone, displaying a picture of the trash floating in his pond. "Care to explain why your garbage ended up on my property?" Karen barely glanced at the screen before scoffing. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because I found your mail in the trash bags, not to mention this." He pulled the HOA flyer from his pocket and held it up. "Looks familiar, doesn't it?" Karen's lips pursed. "That doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have." "Save it," Sam cut in. "I already spoke to the HOA office. They're looking into it, but I thought I'd give you a chance to own up to it first." Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, it's just some trash. You live in the middle of nowhere anyway. What does it matter?" Sam clenched his jaw. "It matters because it's my land. You don't get to use it as your personal dump just because you're too lazy to handle your own garbage." Karen gave him a smug smile. "Well, if you don't like it, maybe you should consider joining the HOA. That way, we could ensure your property meets community standards." Sam let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You really don't get it, do you?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. It's not like anyone got hurt." She stepped back, ready to shut the door in his face. "If you'll excuse me, I have a brunch to attend." Sam didn't stop her. He didn't need to. She had just made a huge mistake. She had given him all the confirmation he needed. She knew what she had done, and she didn't think there would be consequences. Big mistake. Sam walked back to his truck, a smirk forming on his lips. It was time to take this to the next level. Karen was about to learn the hard way that messing with someone's land had very real consequences. Sam spent the rest of the day making calls. First, he contacted the local environmental agency to report illegal dumping on private property. Then, he called a professional cleanup service to assess the cost of removing the trash from his pond. Finally, he reached out to his lawyer, just in case things got messy. By the following morning, a cleanup crew arrived. 2 workers in high boots and gloves surveyed the damage, shaking their heads as they examined the water. One of them, a burly guy with a clipboard, walked up to Sam. "This is bad," he said. "Whoever did this didn't just throw in garbage. Some of these bags have chemical waste, old paint cans, motor oil, who knows what else. It's contaminated the water." Sam's stomach dropped. "You're telling me my pond is ruined?" The worker shrugged. "We'll do our best to clean it up, but the damage is done. If you had fish or wildlife relying on this water, they're in trouble." Sam clenched his fists. Karen had gone beyond just being an entitled nuisance. She had committed a serious environmental offense. He had been angry before, but now he was furious. "How much is this going to cost?" he asked. The worker flipped through his notes. "With decontamination, waste removal, and restoring the water quality, you're looking at 10 grand minimum." Sam exhaled sharply. "Send me the full invoice when it's ready." Now he had exactly what he needed. Karen was about to get a very expensive wake-up call. That afternoon, Sam drafted a formal letter to the HOA, attaching the cleanup invoice, the photos of the trash, and copies of Karen's mail found in the garbage. He made it clear that either Karen paid the full $10,000 cleanup bill, or he would escalate the matter to law enforcement and environmental agencies. Once everything was in order, he hand-delivered the letter to the HOA office. The receptionist's eyes widened as she skimmed through the documents. "Oh my," she muttered. Sam crossed his arms. "Oh my, indeed. You have 1 week to sort this out, or I'm pressing charges." The receptionist swallowed hard. I'll take this to the board immediately." Sam nodded and left, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Karen had thought she could dump her trash on his land without consequence. She was about to learn that some messes come with a very hefty price tag. Karen had no idea what was coming. Sam could already picture the scene, the smug look on her face disappearing the moment she realized just how deep in trouble she was. But he wasn't going to stop at just the HOA. No, he wanted to make sure every possible authority was aware of what she had done. The next day, Sam made another call, this time to the county environmental office. He filed an official complaint about illegal dumping and hazardous waste disposal. When they heard about the contaminated water, they took it very seriously. By the end of the call, they had assured him that an investigation would be opened immediately. By noon, a county inspector arrived at his property. The man, dressed in a high-visibility vest, walked around the pond, taking pictures and notes. "This is bad," he muttered. "Whoever did this could be facing some heavy fines, maybe even legal charges." Sam smirked. "I can give you their name and address." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "That would be very helpful." Sam handed over the evidence, the photos, the mail, the cleanup invoice, and the HOA flyer. The inspector took one look at Karen's name and nodded. "We'll be paying her a visit." By the time evening rolled around, the HOA had also responded to Sam's complaint. He got an email from the board, carefully worded, but the message was clear. Karen was responsible and they weren't going to protect her. She was being forced to cover the entire $10,000 cleanup bill, and if she didn't pay, the HOA would take legal action against her to avoid liability. On top of that, she was being fined by the HOA itself for violating community policies. Sam sat back in his chair, grinning. That was exactly what he had been waiting for. But the best part, the county inspector hadn't even visited her yet. That was the final nail in the coffin. Karen had spent years thinking she was above the rules, that she could manipulate the HOA and control everyone around her. But she had made the mistake of messing with the wrong person. Now it was only a matter of time before the full force of her actions came crashing down on her. And Sam. He was going to enjoy every second of it. Sam didn't have to wait long for the fireworks to begin. The very next morning, he received an email confirmation from the HOA that Karen had been formally notified about the $10,000 cleanup bill. But the real fun started when, around noon, a county environmental enforcement officer, along with 2 uniformed deputies, pulled up in front of Karen's pristine, rule-obsessed house. Sam happened to be driving past the HOA neighborhood at the time, and the moment he spotted the county truck parked in her driveway, he couldn't resist. He pulled over and watched from a safe distance. Karen, dressed in one of her usual pastel-colored outfits, stood at her front door with her arms crossed, a deep scowl on her face. The officer, a no-nonsense woman with a clipboard, was explaining something to her. Sam could already guess the conversation. It wasn't long before Karen's angry voice carried across the street. "This is ridiculous. I didn't dump anything. He's lying. That man has been harassing me for years." The officer calmly handed her a packet of documents, probably the evidence Sam had submitted. Karen glanced at the papers, and for the first time, a flicker of real fear crossed her face. "You have the right to contest the investigation," the officer said, "but as of now, you are being cited for illegal dumping and environmental damage. The county takes hazardous waste disposal very seriously." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Hazardous? It was just a little spring cleaning. It's not like I threw toxic waste in his stupid pond." One of the deputies finally spoke. "Ma'am, paint cans and motor oil containers were found in the water. That qualifies as hazardous waste. Karen sputtered. I didn't. She glanced around as if searching for an escape, but the reality was settling in fast. She wasn't just facing a cleanup bill, she was now dealing with potential legal fines and county citations. The officer continued, flipping a page on her clipboard. You will be required to attend a hearing regarding these charges. If found guilty, you could be facing a fine of up to $30,000 plus additional cleanup costs. Karen staggered, T30,000. Sam, still watching from the safety of his truck, let out a low whistle. That was even worse than he had hoped for. Karen, however, wasn't finished making a fool of herself. She turned on the deputies with absolute desperation in her eyes. This is a setup. He's doing this to me on purpose. He's been trying to ruin my life for years. One of the deputies raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, there's clear photographic and physical evidence linking the waste to you. Karen whirled around and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the HOA office down the street. Why aren't you investigating them? They told us to get rid of junk. I was just following community guidelines. The officer sighed, as if she had heard every excuse in the book. The HOA is not responsible for where you chose to dump your garbage. That choice was yours. Karen stomped her foot like a child, throwing a full-blown tantrum. I'm not paying for this. Well, ma'am, the officer said, completely unfazed, you might not have a choice. Sam could not have been happier. As the officers wrapped up their paperwork, Sam pulled away from the curb and drove home, grinning from ear to ear. Karen was toast. Not only was she stuck with the $10,000 cleanup bill, but she was now facing even larger fines from the county. And best of all, this was only the beginning of her downfall. Karen had always been a woman who thrived on control. She dictated which flowers were allowed in the HOA community, how long someone's holiday decorations could stay up, and even how acceptable a neighbor's mailbox looked. But for the first time in her life, she was completely powerless. Over the next few days, Sam heard whispers about the chaos unfolding within the HOA. The board was furious with Karen. Not only had she dumped her trash illegally, but she had also dragged their entire organization into an environmental scandal. Residents were gossiping, HOA members were distancing themselves from her, and some were even demanding her removal from the board. Sam knew things had truly hit the fan when he saw Karen's picture in the local news. The headline, HOA board member fined for illegal dumping, facing $30,000 in environmental penalties. Sam nearly choked on his coffee from laughing. Someone had tipped off the press, and now the entire community knew about Karen's shameful stunt. The article detailed how the county was investigating her, how she was facing massive fines, and how the HOA had officially disavowed her actions. The best part? There was even a photo of her standing outside her house, looking absolutely miserable, with a county violation notice taped to her door. Sam grinned. Couldn't have happened to a better person. The next time he saw Karen in person was even more satisfying. He was driving past the HOA neighborhood again when he spotted her standing in her front yard. She was arguing with two men, probably county inspectors, while a neighbor stood nearby, recording her meltdown on their phone. Sam rolled down his window just in time to hear Karen screech. I am not a criminal. I was trying to clean up the community. I shouldn't have to pay for this. One of the inspectors responded calmly. Ma'am, you've already been cited. If you refuse to pay the fines, the county can take further legal action. Karen looked like she was going to explode. She spotted Sam in his truck and immediately turned red with rage. You, she screamed, stomping toward him. This is your fault. You set me up. You ruined my life. Sam leaned out of his window, completely unfazed. No, Karen, you ruined your own life when you dumped your garbage in my pond. Karen literally shook with fury, her fists clenched. This isn't fair. Sam smirked. Life's not fair, sweetheart. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a clean pond to enjoy. And with that, he drove off, leaving Karen screaming in frustration on her HOA-mandated perfect lawn. With Karen effectively self-destructing, Sam finally felt at peace again. His pond had been cleaned, the HOA had turned against their once powerful tyrant, and the county was making sure she paid every penny for her entitled stupidity. Justice had been served, and served cold. A few weeks later, Sam received a letter in the mail from the HOA. Not another attempt to recruit him, but rather an official notice stating that Karen had been removed from her position on the board. It turned out that after the scandal, most of the residents wanted her gone. Her reckless actions had nearly dragged the entire HOA into legal trouble, and no one wanted to be associated with her anymore. Sam laughed as he read it. Good riddance. But the real cherry on top came a month later. One day, Sam was fixing his fence when he noticed a moving truck parked outside Karen's house. Curious, he wandered over to his truck, leaning on it as he watched workers haul furniture out of her home. Moments later, Karen herself stepped outside, looking utterly defeated. She wasn't wearing one of her usual designer outfits. No fancy pearls, no smug attitude, just a tired, angry woman watching her perfect life crumble. Sam couldn't resist. He walked up to the sidewalk and cleared his throat. "Need some help?" he asked with a grin. Karen's head snapped up, her eyes burning with hatred. "Go to hell, Sam." He chuckled. "Already been there. You dumped trash in my pond, remember?" She glared daggers at him before turning away. "I hope you're happy," she muttered. "I had to sell my house to cover the fines." Sam let out a slow, satisfied sigh. "Oh, Karen, I've never been happier." She shot him one last look of pure loathing before storming back inside. Sam watched as the movers finished their work, then as Karen's car pulled out of the driveway for the last time. The HOA neighborhood was finally free of her reign of terror. And Sam, well, he went home, grabbed a cold beer, and sat on his freshly cleaned dock, watching the sunset over his peaceful, garbage-free pond. Justice had never tasted so sweet.